Welcome to the Conscious Living Podcast, conversations to educate, empower, and enlighten our world. An uplifting and inspiring series of conversations and talks with your host, Jackie Woodside. We are educating minds, empowering lives, and enlightening souls to create a world where love prevails. In this engaging podcast, we deliver exciting, positive, transformative talks and teachings designed to elevate your life. Now, let's join our host, Jackie Woodside, for this week's session.
Hello there and good day, everybody. Jackie Woodside here, and this is the Conscious Living Podcast, where we seek to educate, empower, and enlighten our world. I am so glad that you're here with us, one of those people that's really invested and caring about raising consciousness on the planet, creating a world that's just more loving, more hospitable, and a world that works for everyone. So thank you for being here with us. I want to get started today by welcoming to the Conscious Living Podcast someone who I've been really excited to meet, who is a real pioneer and expert in this field of consciousness studies and consciousness research. Dr. Jeffrey Dunne, president of the International Consciousness Research Laboratories, which was established in 1997 to continue the work of the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research. Say that one 5 times fast. The Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research, known as PAIR, those research laboratories at Princeton University. He's going to tell us a lot more about that. And Dr. Dunne has also done several decades of research at Johns Hopkins University from fields of data science, acoustic, linguistics, artificial intelligence. He's also, in his spare time, an award-winning playwright and author. Oh my gosh, Jeff Dunne, so much that you have done. Thank you for being with us here at the Conscious Living Podcast. I want to welcome you to the show.
Well, thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here, Jack.
Yeah. Anything else that you want to flush out with your bio, your background, get to know, so our listeners can get to know you a little bit better?
Well, I think the thing, if somebody says they want to kind of know where I'm coming from, I'm kind of an odd eclectic mix. I like to do a lot of different things.
Yeah.
And I've always sort of prided myself on being as much of a generalist as I could. And so, yeah. That's
I mean, it's interesting.
One thing away, that would be it.
Yeah. No, you have an interesting combination of kind of left-right sensibilities in your brain, with being an author and a playwright, but also a researcher and scientist. So it's really, really lovely to see. I'm really excited to talk with you more about the work that you have done, because you're an academic, and I love academic stuff. So let's start with the International Consciousness Research Laboratories. It's a charity that you established to continue the work at Princeton University. So I'm curious, did that work dry up? Did that end? And, what can you tell us about the work that you were doing through Princeton and its research and findings?
Sure. The research at Princeton was actually it was not done by me directly. Okay. It was done by a pair of people. No, Princeton Engineering Anomalies is acronym PAIR, but by my mother, Brenda Dunne, and a professor at the university, Dr. Robert John. And they had run the laboratory from the late 1970s through 2007. And it was that pair of people who had originally established ICRL in the late 1990s, knowing that they were going to retire. So the lab closed when they retired, and this charity was sort of the vehicle to move into the next step. And I was involved in ICRL pretty much from the beginning, but only took on being the sort of the president and the main driver of it over the last few years.
Okay, all right. So tell us more about the studies at PAIR and the research. What kinds of findings, what did they study, first of all?
Yeah.
What kinds of anomalies did they study, and what findings did they have?
The lab was set up based on some experiences that Dr. John had. He, an undergraduate student, had come to him and wanted to replicate some of the work that was being done at Stanford, looking at whether or not intention, human consciousness essentially, could affect physical systems. and he supervised that student's senior project and discovered indeed that was something that was really happening, and felt that it was a phenomenon that needed to be studied and understood better. So he had recruited Brenda Dunne to help, and together as a team, they ran that laboratory. And what they were looking at was, can people, sort of everyday off the street people, not particular, folks who are focused on this as their lifetime, or either self-proclaimed gifted or other people have proclaimed them as gifted, but just regular people, can they have an effect on physical systems? And I say physical systems in the most general sense. So some of the experiments that they ran involved like balls of marbles falling through a series of pegs and forming a distribution. Could they change the statistics of that distribution, have more balls that fell to the left or the right? By far the most data they collected, because it was the easiest experiments to run, were digital. So they have an electronic coin flipper. You can think of it, it's called a random event generator, an REG, and that would generate, of course, data considerably faster than having balls falling through a series of pegs. And so that was the sort of main workhorse experiment that they did. Can you have somebody, just by having their intention on it, have that system generate more heads or more tails than it should, right? The system's designed to be 50-50 and left to its own devices, if you will. It generates 50-50 probabilities. But what they were able to demonstrate is that when there's an intention, that probability distribution changes. You can have more heads or more tails. Not a huge effect, not a I'm going to go to Vegas and clean out the bank kind of effect, but instead of 50-50, maybe it was 49.99, 50.01, which again, for wanting to roll dice isn't going to help you too much. But if you're worried about the sophisticated electronics that are, say, hoping to keep an aircraft in the air, that's a big deal. And so they had, over the course of 30 years, demonstrated that this effect was real, that it was documentable scientifically, and began to put together, theories on what was going on in that respect, because there were a lot of very interesting facets about the experimental results that they had in terms of impacts on time and space, on the nature of physical reality and consciousness in that reality, and in some sense helping to give shape to that reality as well.
That's fascinating. I mean, I was surprised to hear you say 50.001 versus 49.999. That doesn't seem like an even valid, like that could have been something in the machine versus human intention. So was it really that insignificant of a difference?
Well, you got to remember that the significance of that distribution depends on how much data you collect.
Okay.
So if, for example, you run it 10 times, that distinction is pretty much irrelevant. On the other hand, and this is what they did, if you run it 1 billion times or 2 billion times, the significance of changing that amount amounts to the kinds of odds that are more akin to, like, you'd have to rerun the entire life of the universe 3 or 4 times to have a chance of getting that kind of result. So because of the magnitude of data that was collected,
okay,
right, even those small changes in probabilities were highly significant.
okay.
Yeah,
okay. That's interesting. I don't know if they did this kind of study, but I'd be curious if they brought in a group of highly trained, say Tibetan monks versus 50 people from a parking lot at a mall. Did they do any variability studies like that, or of people who might be more trained in the use of their mind and consciousness versus the person who's not?
Yeah, they did. They weren't included in the official scientific reports.
Okay.
But they obviously, you can't do this without being curious about that question.
Right.
And as you can imagine, people, if you take somebody who's spent their life doing tantric meditation, they tended to have stronger results. It really is. It's a trainable thing, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's the thing about it, what turns out to be the most important aspects to train is, in fact, the suppression of your mind's natural inclination to get in the way of these things,
Yeah.
right? So people who are meditators tended to do a better job because they were able to remove their intellect out of the process and act at a deeper level.
I love that. That's just really fascinating. Let's translate those kinds of outcomes from the pair research to conscious living, intentional living.
Yeah.
How do you see it extrapolating into a kind of practical day-to-day experience for people like you and me?
Yeah. I think one of the most significant things that happened out of pair, I mean, people have had an appreciation that we are more than a material thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
For thousands of years. This is not surprising, but there is a comfort that a lot of people find in seeing it in numbers. And along with that, there's always this kind of question, I think, in people's mind, especially when they are beginning to live in a more conscious way and focused on sort of broader things, to say, well, okay, but is this really just my reaction to what's going on, right? I've changed my psychology about what I'm doing by living consciously. And that's where the changes are really happening. And there's no question that there are changes and really important changes that are happening there. However, what I think is really exciting about what Pear showed is that it's not just inside of you. When you are living in this way, if you are able to live with a very clear intention and a very deliberate consciousness, you are affecting the rest of the universe as well, right? You are actually making changes to these things that you would normally define as outside of yourself, right? And I think that's really exciting for somebody who's focused on conscious living to realize that your conscious intentions towards yourself and towards other things are changing the rest of the universe as well, in small ways. But sometimes those small ways are extremely important. That butterfly effect kind of thing. You don't need a large change. You don't need the 50-50 to turn into 60-40. Sometimes it really is enough to get that 50.01 change to make a huge change in what's going to happen in your life. And if you think about this in the context of synchronicity and that sort of thinking, right, that little change might be exactly what brings about the right set of synchronicities to make something quite large and impactful in one's life.
I love that. So it aligns with one of the things I love to say often at the end of this podcast or on my summits, that anytime any one of us grows in consciousness, all of humanity changes, because there is just one of us. So, I have this in my head, Jeff, and I'm curious what you think of this. There was a book published recently, very recently, actually, just came out by Dr. Robert Sapolsky. I think Sapolsky. I apologize if I get his last name wrong. He's a neurobiologist, and he wrote a book called Determined that just was published. His previous book was called Behave, and the one before that was called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. So he is, again, a neurobiologist. This is in a 528-page tome on the fact that humans do not have free will. He says his book seeks to be the scientific basis for the fact that our lives are determined by our biology and our neurology. So I haven't read it yet. I've read a couple synopsises of it. And of course, it flies in the face of things that you and I study and espouse. So, I know you haven't read the book or thought about it yet, but you get the concept. And certainly this is the whole notion of free will has been around forever. What are your thoughts on that based on the research that you've seen?
So I think a lot of this idea of pure determinism, right, is inherently tied to the idea that there is time, that time is an objective existing thing, and that it's immutable and it's one directional, right? You go forward in time, you do the things that you do because of all the causes that have led up to this, right? There's no free will because I'm doing exactly what I have to do as a result of the biochemical reactions and the stimuli and all the rest of that. But what the pair data showed was that time is not really that. One of the natural questions when you're running an experiment, you're sitting in front of a device and saying, I want to affect this device in some way. And you said, well, should I touch the device? Or is it enough to sit next to the device? The answer was, you don't have to touch it. You can sit next to it. Well, if I don't need to sit next to it, can I sit at the other end of the room? Can I sit in another room? Can I sit in another building? Can I sit in another state? Could I be around the world? And the answer was, yeah, you can be anywhere you like. Space doesn't have anything to do with this. So I can be anywhere. Now the next question, right? If space doesn't have anything to do with it, what about time? Turns out time doesn't have anything to do with it. I can have my intention, sure, when the device is running, but I can also have my intention a week before the device is running. And by the way, I can also have my intention a week after the device has run, so long as I don't already know what the results are, right? And that's a question of uncertainty that's important. That's a separate topic. But when you look at this data, there's no avoiding this. Time is not an absolute statement on the structure of the universe. Rather, what really makes sense in this context is that time is a way that consciousness organizes its experiences, the same way that space is a way that it organizes its experience. Very valuable, don't get me wrong. This is what allows us to have communication between people and talk about things and share concepts. But it's not a fundamental property of the universe. By the way, quantum mechanics says the same thing. Time is not fundamental. Time, like position and momentum and energy and all the rest of this, these are measurements we make on a system. They're an organizing structure that we put in place, right? So the idea that we have no free will really doesn't fall out as a result of that when you say, well, if time is us organizing our experiences, I think now I also have not read the book, so maybe he's got some answer to this question that I don't know. But I would say that the idea that we don't have free will kind of falls apart at that point. Free will, in fact, may very well be the only absolute thing that we do have. When you look at it that way, right? How are we choosing to perceive and more than perceive, to interpret the perceptions that we have and so forth. But the idea of free will, I think, is really fundamental. And in fact, one of the ways that I like to describe this, the sort of mental paradox of being able to have an effect on something that's happened before, is to think in terms of attractors and how one, in putting one's focus in a particular area, establishes sort of an expected outcome, if you will. And that can be forward or backward in time. And there's a principle called syntropy, which has a beautiful metaphor for this. It arises out of the same equations of physics that give entropy and that talk about information and energy flowing forward in time. It's another valid solution to those same equations, and it describes information and energy flowing backwards in time. And in that context, we are, as much as we are causal, the way that this, I think the argument would be made against free will, we are also purpose-driven. We move forward towards a purpose that calls us as much as our past experience pushes us. And in that context, those ideas of purpose is really where you can put in that understanding of free will, right? We're the ones who can establish what our purposes are that are pulling us forward.
So fascinating. I would love to be in a room with, maybe you and 2 or 3 of your colleagues, and Dr. Saplotsky and 2 or 3 of his colleagues, who are from the deterministic neurobiological perception. They also pointed to that their belief is that basically nothing exists beyond the brain, and that all of your decision making, I mean, all of your decision making is predetermined by things like what you ate that day, what experiences you had as a child, even the inner uterine environment of your gestation, he points to as being the deterministic factors. And he even goes so far as to say no one is guilty because the person who pulled the trigger or robbed the bank didn't have choice. They didn't have free will. Just a and he doesn't say that, in some way that's nihilistic. He actually is saying it as a way of raising compassion for the human condition. So again, I haven't read the whole 528 pages. I've read a couple synopsises about it, but I'm bringing it up because I feel like you're a scholar of equal import as him. You also wrote a book, perhaps several, but the book I'm thinking of is your book Nexus, where you have some really interesting findings. Do you mind diving into what you wrote about in your book Nexus? And feel free to mention others. I apologize. That's the one that I've got off the top of my head.
No, that's great. The Nexus was written to do a very specific thing that other texts that books that ICRL Press has published. Well, this is actually our 20th book, and most of the books before that were kind of academic in nature, and they would describe the results. So primarily the ones that I should say that were written by Brenda and Baum were of this nature. There are other ones that we've published from other authors, but
when you say we've published, you mean your institute?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
ICRL, as a division, ICRL Press. Yeah. And so the other books are kind of academic in style. You could see them being a textbook for a class, for example. But one of the things that has really presented itself as critical in all of this is being able to reach out to broader audiences. Academic style texts and going into the details of the research and the protocols appeals to one audience, but there is an importance in reaching a much broader audience as well, because ultimately, if you've grown up in a material society, listening, for example, to a conclusion that we are deterministic, non-living things, it's natural to think, okay, I can believe that. Right? But there's other things. If you talk about it and say, well, wait a minute, entropy says that we should evolve into amoebas. Things become less ordered in time, not more ordered. Amoebas shouldn't evolve into us. Somebody's got to go, well, wait a minute. There's something more there, right?
Right.
But you ideally want that argument to be getting across to a much broader audience, but also to a much younger audience. You want to reach out. And so this book, Nexus, was our attempt to make the ideas behind this much more accessible. So unlike the other books, Nexus is a novel.
Interesting.
It does not show you any charts. It doesn't describe anything in the scientific perspective. It tells you a story. It's fiction. I think one might call it science fiction. Sort of speculative fiction is more how I often think about it, but it's a science fiction in that it takes the science that was being explored at Pear and it nudges it over the edge. So it turns it into a fictional thing, but the core ideas are still the basis of this idea of syntropy, right? The idea that there's a purpose-driven aspect to the universe as much as there's a cause of one, and so forth. And so it tells a story in that context and allows the audience to get used to some of these ideas without being thrown any equations or academic kind of feeling. It describes, or it shares the ideas as a story. You're following characters who are overcoming challenges. In the particular case, the story is about two worlds that were once one, ours and a complementary world. So ours is a sort of multi-societal, patriarchal, yang-based world. The complementary world is a matriarchal, single society, yin-focused world.
Yeah.
And these worlds are coming together, and each world has a champion who's told, you have to go battle to the death with the other champion to see which world is going to survive. And these champions come together, and I'm not sure that another act of violence is really the right way to go forward with this. And it becomes the story is really about their journey to find another solution that doesn't involve billions of people dying. So it's a story, but at the same time, the ideas that are underneath this, what is the nature of syntropy? What is the nature of us as we relate to the larger sort of ecosystem or greater sort of construct that we are a part of, and the relationship there? And what does it mean, for example, to your consciousness in that context, and to live consciously, and the other world? In fact, that's a very central theme to that, right? Because their world is focused on living with the focus on the future, living consciously and deliberately in the right path for themselves.
Nice. Wow. And so you're the one that you wrote a novel. So you again, this is these two sides of you. Your playwright work, are your plays also kind of bringing in these themes of intention and consciousness and creative potential?
About half of them. So I've written quite a few. I've written 6 full-length plays and about 160 short plays. So I would say about half tend to just be kind of either fun things or other philosophical things, whatever it is, the nature of good and evil kinds of stuff. But about half of them in some way are trying to bring these ideas forward as well. Usually not as a lecture, but as a description of, some situation that you can get into because it's got a plot and characters who are doing things.
Wonderful. And you were raised with this. I'm curious, Jeff, if you don't mind backtracking a little bit. Your mom was involved in this research, so you were raised with someone who believes in the power of intention and that our minds have creative abilities. How did your mom get into this? That was a long time ago, kind of a woman before her time, if you will.
Yeah. She was in many ways, in terms of women's rights and all kinds of other aspects that you would expect would go along with a very dynamic personality who was willing to challenge the establishment, right? Wow. So she went to school later in life. I was probably around 4 or 5, maybe maybe even 6 when when she went back to school to get her undergraduate, then her master's degree. She eventually got her PhD at sort of the end of life as an honorary PhD, which was really wonderful in recognition of her contributions. But she went back, and her original focus was in psychology. She's always very interested in religion and mythologies, and where people are coming from and what makes them who they are. So she had come across some research that people were doing in sort of non-ordinary aspects, and in fact, at the time, of course, you had to speak of it this way. It was anomalies and non-ordinary kinds of experiences. The irony of it being that almost everybody's had them. Right. The non-ordinary is, in fact, the person who has not had some kind of experience of this nature.
It's actually much more ordinary. It's just people don't want to talk about it.
Exactly. There is a stigma that we're slowly overcoming to the point that we can have those conversations. But she had, in many ways, like that undergraduate student I mentioned earlier, she came across research that somebody else had done, the people at Stanford, and said, I wonder if I can replicate that. I wonder if I can do something similar and extend it. So she hadn't done the same experiment in terms of affecting physical systems, but she had looked at remote perception. Can you get information that comes from non-standard senses? And so she had looked at that and was doing some studies of it and replications of it when Dr. John had found her, because he was at that stage looking to establish this research program. And together they said, yeah, we're the right team to do this. And that's how they came about it. And then, for the first few years of my life, this was all happening when I was 12, 13, something like that. And then, this was just sort of the norm.
That's so great.
After school, I'd go hang out in the lab, steal their cookies, watch the experiments, and participate in experiments.
Wow, what a unique and really wonderful experience. So ICRL, Institute of Consciousness Research Laboratories, it has a publishing arm that you just mentioned that you put 20 books out. What else do you do now? Like, how is the work being carried out today?
Yeah. Well, we've had right from the very beginning sort of three focus areas. One has been education, and the books and so forth fall into that.
Yeah.
Another piece that kind of goes into that. Well, I'll say one is education. One is continued research, and one is exploring the applications of this. Okay, it's one thing to say, well, consciousness can have, or intention and consciousness has an effect. Now, what difference can that make? What's the so what of all of that, right? And towards that end, we have a few different things. Publishing, of course, we mentioned. We try to bring people together to have discussions, to give people an opportunity to ask questions. Towards that end, we do a variety of different things. We have monthly meetups, for example, that will typically, what we'll do is we'll invite somebody to come and give a talk on something related to this, and then have a question and answer dialogue afterwards. The next one, which is actually this Saturday, is a little bit different in style. We tried this last December and it worked beautifully, and people said, let's do this again. Nice. And it's where people will come in and share for 3, 4, 5 minutes what they're doing, and an opportunity for other people to say, hey, that's really interesting, or can I be involved in that, and to help that networking. Yeah. We're part of we try to organize larger scale events. For example, there's a conference coming up in a few weeks, later in November, in Northern England.
Oh, nice.
And that's a science and consciousness conference. That this is the third year that we've been doing this. We're part of a team that does this particular thing. And that is, so we will try to bring people together for that kind of thing. And in fact, where that's happening is another example of things we're working as in terms of education and outreach and networking. There's the facility where that's happening has a little space called the Weird Experience, WYRD. Weird is the Anglo-Saxon word meaning interconnectedness. And it's all of the equipment that was used at Princeton has now been moved over to England, and we're setting all of that up so people can go in and say, oh, this is what the experiments were like, and give it a try. Not for scientific purposes, but for experiential purposes. Sure. We just, we're in the process of setting up another event, getting groups together. So we also host a discussion series. We've got a fascinating one that's going on right now, examining the idea of the information field, and trying to establish, what are the ideas that are behind this, so that we can, so people can know if they're talking about the same thing, or are they talking about something different. If you've ever gone to a conference, for example, and somebody stands up and talks for 45 minutes and their idea, and you kind of look around the room going, I don't think there were two people in this room who heard the same talk. And that happens a lot. Right. Because we don't use the vocabulary the same way. We've grown up with different backgrounds. Right. So trying to help with those sorts of things. And then, of course, research. We continue to, we've had some really fascinating projects that have gone on over the last year. Kind of our two biggest was looking at out-of-body experiences and seeing if we can measure, using these random event generators, some kind of signal when people are having an out-of-body experience. The data is still in process for that. But the one before that was looking at people in intensive care units and looking at what happened at the moment of death. And those have had very strong signals, which is perhaps not surprising. There's a lot of evidence for a long time that at that moment of death, strange things happen. Clocks stop is a big one. But it's so we weren't surprised. But indeed, when we have a random event generator collecting data at that time, at the moment of death, we'll see a large deviation from what's supposed to be a random sequence is not random at that point.
Wow.
And
Really
of
fascinating.
course, other meaningful times, like when the family discovers this, and the times of strong things happening at in terms of consciousness.
Wow. I'm curious, where do you have funding from for this kind of institute?
Our funding right now is purely from donation from
Oh,
people
okay.
who are interested in this.
Okay. So how do people support your organization? I know there'll be a lot of our listeners who are really into consciousness. Is there a way for people to get involved with your organization and I don't know, be a part of it and support it?
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of sort of the financial support, if one goes to ICRL.org, one can make donations, and that's sort of a large fraction of how we continue.
Yeah.
But also in terms of getting involved, and people who want to carry out research sometimes will reach out and will either maybe just provide expertise or experience in helping to design experiments, or sometimes we'll have folks who just say, hey, I would love to borrow a random event generator for a week. Can you help me out with that if I don't want to get, they're not terribly expensive, but
Right.
they didn't want to get one. And some people, just say, hey, I would love to help out however I can. And so we're always looking for people to become part of the effort to help, whether that's just in keeping things on the rails, or just general, website improvement, or whatever it is, right? Like
Right.
there's so many things that go into keeping
Yeah,
it a not-for-profit running.
for
So
sure.
there's always volunteer opportunities as well.
Wonderful. Wonderful. What a contribution. I'm having this vision, Jeff, that you and Dr. Zaplotsky would, and perhaps others, it would be a fascinating online event. You know how summits today are kind of all coming from one perspective, the
Yeah,
education of anti-aging, or, health summits, or I have a conscious living summit, and everybody's kind of coming from one perspective. But wouldn't it
right,
be
right.
interesting to host a summit where it's actually two sides of a topic being presented, and giving people the opportunity to weigh in on both sides of the topic? So maybe you
Yeah,
and I can dive into that if we could take that step a bit further.
yeah.
Anything you want to leave people with, Jeff, about our ICRL or any of the other work that you're doing?
I honestly, the most important thing that I think anybody can leave anybody else with is to encourage people to keep open minds. One of the beautiful things about science is that it is intended to be a vehicle of exploration. And one of the awful things about science is that sometimes we forget that it's supposed to be a vehicle of exploration.
Right, for sure.
And we think that it's a dogmatic statement of what is an absolute, truth, and you're not permitted to disagree with what the scientific community says. But you have to remember that we all are doing the best that we can, right? Science, in whatever form it's taken over the last 10,000 years, or maybe it's 100,000 years, has been striving to establish a model of reality and to understand the universe around us. And to date, if you look back, 100% of our models have been proven to be wrong.
Right.
Every one of them's been wrong. That's why we keep exploring. We haven't gotten it.
Yeah.
And so you have to recognize that we've got 100% track record of not having the right answer. So the odds of us having the right answer now are really low.
Yeah.
They're probably zero, right? So, keep an open mind about what's there. Don't allow somebody to tell you that your experiences aren't valid because they don't agree with what somebody else said.
Yeah.
You've got to listen to yourself and realize that what you're experiencing is real. And if you feel like what's happening is significant, you have to support yourself in that, and explore it, right? It may not be what you think it is, but it doesn't make it invalid.
Right.
And I think that's really important, that we need to always remember we're getting new data and new experiences, new ways of looking at things.
Well, and consciousness is evolving.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the data can't be static because consciousness is not static.
Right. We are not static.
And the brain is evolving. We
Yeah.
didn't used to have large frontal lobes, and now we do.
Yeah.
And the brain will continue to evolve. I'm so curious to see, with this advent of super fast technology and in our pocket, a computer in our pocket every single minute of every day with, all the knowledge available before humanity in your pocket at
Right.
a given moment. Write an essay for you in under 30 seconds. Takes a minute to write a 500-word essay now. And, all of these incredible changes. I'm so curious how that's going to change the human brain and human consciousness.
Yeah, indeed. And it's no question, we're seeing things change now, right?
Oh, so rapidly.
Seeing how it happens. But I think, the thing to hold on to, I would say, is that we're more than that brain. There's so much evidence out there that what's happening and as part of our consciousness is not happening inside the brain, but much more akin to the brain being something of an antenna that's allowing us to make that connection to something broader. Because cases, for example, where they've measured brain completely stopped, and yet people will come back from that and be able to relate things that happened while their brain had no activity.
Right.
There's more that's happening. The brain's only one part of a much larger complex system. And it's there that consciousness is evolving too, right? Even beyond the brain.
Right.
That's a thing. By the way, Beyond the Brain, having mentioned that exact phrase, is a conference also that's happening in not this weekend, I think the following weekend, as part of a group called the Scientific and Medical Network. I'm speaking at it as well. So if anybody wants to tune into that, look for Beyond the Brain conference.
Wow.
I wasn't going to say that, but I was like, Beyond
the Brain, right. Is that virtual or live?
It is. It's virtual.
Virtual. Okay. Yeah, I will definitely look that up. All right, Dr. Dunne, thank you so much for being such a knowledgeable and intriguing guest here on the Conscious Living podcast. So people can find you at ICRL.org. That's where people can get more information about you and about the incredible work that you're doing. So thank you so much. It's been a blast to have this chance to talk with you.
Likewise. Thank you, Jack.